Hey guys, June here, and in this video I want to take a look at one of the oldest strategies for PvM in RuneScape, which is walking your enemies. To very briefly summarize how this effect actually works, we're basically going to be spam clicking on the ground or on the minimap behind the direction that the enemy is fleeing from us as we're walking underneath them. Because the player and the enemy both move at the same speed, the player is always going to be directly underneath the enemy, and the enemy is going to be attempting to attack the player and stepping off of them in the same direction that the player is moving, ensuring that they're never actually able to attack us. However, at the same time that this is happening, the player is still able to attack the enemy by using their keybinds to manually activate abilities. You can see in this video clip I do make a few mistakes, mostly because the NXT animations lag a lot and it's tough to tell where the KBD actually is, and he ends up kind of teleporting around and hitting me occasionally, but if done correctly you never take any damage. Even just as it's shown here in its simplest form, this strategy can be great for Ironmen or hardcore Ironmen, or maybe low-level players to punch above their weight, so to speak, in terms of bossing. I personally use this all the time on my noob account that doesn't have any tier 90 weapons or curses or overloads or anything like that to get my Reaper tasks done, because the Reaper points are a really great way to make money with Hydrix and everything, plus it's good Slayer experience. Calfight Queen's a real pain in the ass because she's got really high defense and deals a reasonable enough amount of damage that it's only possible for me to get 1 to 2 kills per trip without doing walking, but if I do this strategy I can get as many as I need to in a single trip, and that makes it a really great trick for giving new players and low-level players an advantage in terms of making some money and gaining some experience. Now obviously this strategy is really overpowered. It makes the player essentially invincible and reduces the difficulty of any of the enemies to no more than a goblin or something. Because of that, there have been tons of anti-walk features that have been added to bosses by Jagex developers over the course of RuneScape's history. The first iterations of this anti-walk feature were basic stomp damage. Anytime you stood underneath an enemy you were dealt a huge amount of damage, and this was a pretty effective way to deal with walking. Some variations include a stomp damage that acts more like a bleed, which can be dealt to the player. This was given to bosses like the Giant Mole and Beastmaster Durzag. The Giant Mole's variation is pretty weak, but Beastmaster Durzag can kill you in just a couple of seconds. Some other enemies were given stuns alongside that stomp damage, and that actually brings us to the first of the high-level PvM encounters where walking is a really common strategy. This is of course Araxxor, and it tends to be done on the top path, though you can really walk Araxxor anytime between phases 1 and 3 except on path 3. Araxxor's walk mechanic is more nuanced than most enemies. He actually won't do the stomp and stun special as long as you're only 1 square in from the front of him. During this time you can DPS as much as you want, and the additional benefit here is that because of the fact that all of his attacks are being stalled, he's also not going to be using any special attacks. His walk pattern gets a little bit wonky as he's going around the first corner, so we're actually going to be underneath Araxxor for a short time, and so it's important to anticipate ahead of time to avoid the stun attack that goes alongside that first stomp that we're going to get, and then we can simply continue with the walk afterward. By employing this strategy effectively on top paths, you can essentially skip phases 2 and 3, and the added benefit here is that if you're on the 1 and 2 rotation you can do an entire kill without getting any minion spawns when done correctly. Another place that walking is commonly employed as part of the strategy is at Vorago, and you have a few extra things to worry about here. He still has a stomp effect, and the damage from that effect actually depends on what your current HP is. Though it is still capable of killing you, it's better to camp slightly low HP to reduce the overall amount of damage while you're walking. That stomp is also accompanied by a bind, and so you do have to worry about using anticipation and freedom appropriately to block those, and you'll have to experiment with the timing to get used to it. You could potentially even take this further by using a clear-headed and reflexes combination gizmo on one of your perked pieces of armor in order to basically walk Virago forever without having to worry about the bind. Finally, the last thing that you actually need to worry about while doing the walk itself is that because you're not the only person in the encounter, after a period of time when Virago's not able to attack you, he will simply change his aggression to one of the other teammates, and you'll have to use Provoke to get him to focus back on you. The timing for each of the aspects of this mechanic take a little bit of practice, but it can be a really great tool to use, especially if you're doing very small team kills, or if your team doesn't have a lot of experience at Virago. A good base tank who's very effective at walking can really clean up phase 3. Next is another boss that's relatively commonly walked, and she has the same stomp and stun as the other two that we just talked about. However, in addition to that, she resets toward the center of her arena anytime she does that anti-walk mechanic. Because of that, the common strategy here is not to perpetually walk next, but to just let her attack you every once in a while to make sure that she never actually does the anti-walk mechanic, and you use walking instead to delay her attacks instead of preventing them. Since walking also stalls her special attacks, it can come in really handy on all phases, and you can find more information about that in my next solo guide. So these tactics can be used pretty much anywhere. Another common place that they're used is at Rise of the Six, where one person will be dedicated to specifically walking Kirill, who doesn't even have any kind of anti-walk mechanics, but that prevents Kirill from using the bomb specials, and it really makes the fight a whole lot easier since he's primarily the most damaging and most dangerous brother. On the other side of this, Jagex has successfully implemented anti-walking measures that prevent players from doing it completely with Telos and God Wars Dungeon 2 bosses, and there are some rumors that a full retroactive release of these walking countermeasures will be released in the future. Until that time, however, they are still widely applicable to most bosses, with the exception of a couple like Beastmaster Durzag and Corporeal Beast. Most of all, however, this is a really versatile tactic, and since you can use it pretty much anywhere, I would encourage all of you to experiment with it at whatever your favorite bosses are, especially at Araxxor, because it's really game-changing. As usual, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.